Alright, so this is section 26.3 Cladistics by Darius DeWitt. So basically, cladistics in a nutshell is the classification of species based on evolutionary relationships, and it constructs the phylogenetic tree, really. A cladistic approach will want to discriminate among as many possible phylogenetic trees and basically knock out all of the incorrect ones. And this gives different ways evolutionary changes might have occurred, and by doing this, you can knock out the incorrect ones, really, as we talked about in Bobby's section. So, Bobby already talked about this, but primitive characters are the oldest form of a character, and an example would be the jaw of a human, because basically the jaw of a human has jaws have been around through many of our past evolutionary chains, and so this is a relatively old character. And another word for a primitive character is simpliciomorphy. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. And so since I just talked about primitive characters, derived characters occur in the most recent ancestor. So an example would be bipedalism in humans, because bipedalism started in some of our most closely related ancestors, and we are the last ones alive, as we learned in in Human Origins last year. And so derived characters are also called synapomorphy. And really what derived characters help in a cladogram, which I'll explain later, is it indicates a clade. It takes the I'll explain it later, but you can really choose the in groups, the out groups, and I'll be getting to what all of this means shortly. So this is a very good example of the most simplistic cladogram that it was given in the book, and it really gives a nice rundown of how this goes. So as you can see, species A has 2 eyes and 2 front legs. And if you go to the right, the rat-like animal still has 2 eyes and still has 2 front legs, and that continues through F and G. However, if you look at B, which is like similar to a dolphin, it has 2 eyes and 2 front flippers. So when you talk about species D and E, which are whales and dolphins, they have a shared primitive character where they have 2 of the same, like where they have 2 eyes. However, their 2 front flippers are known as derived characters. So just like to distinguish what we mean with primitive and derived characters, primitive just means relatively older, while derived means relatively newer. However, neither is necessarily more or less complex, because derived characters just modify a species that could be more advantageous. Derived characters could be more, less, or even equally complex as the primitive character. It all just depends on what the species needs to survive, really. So as I talked about in groups and out groups before, and so in a cladogram, the in group includes the desired character. So in humans, let's say you wanted the in group to have the character of hair, for example. Then the in group would have every animal that is currently alive, obviously, that has hair through the phylogenetic tree. However, the out group branches off before the character really surfaces. So I mean, a certain type of fish maybe, or a turtle. I don't know. They would be in the out group, for example. So this really describes all the major parts of a cladogram. As you can see here, taxons 1, 2, and 3 are all the in-group because they must have the desired trait talked about before. And so the root would be species A, because that is where the cladogram begins. That is the first species or character that we really begin with. And because the out group, as you can see at the very top, branches off before the in group comes in, before they have any of the other branches, that's why it's called the out group. And here's another example using actual like an actual cladogram. So as you can see, humans are farthest to the right, and if our in-group, let's say, wanted to have a narrow nose from the baboon to the humans and everything, and the chimpanzees in between, that would be the in-group, while everything to the left would be the out-group. Here's another example of a phylogenetic tree. And as you can see on the top, it's the characters, and this is really how you would start to make a phylogenetic tree. So you take the first character that you can think of. So let's see here. And so, as you can see, the lancelet, which is very farthest to the left, has a notochord, and after that, you start seeing the vertebra and the hinged jaw and being a tetrapod, and on the very right is the rabbits having the mammary gland. And because the rabbit is all the way to the right, you can see the rabbit is all the way to the right because it does have mammary glands. It is a tetrapod. It has a hinged jaw. It's a vertebrate, and it has a notochord. While a lizard, for example, doesn't have mammary glands. And the less you have, the farther to the left you would be, for example. So to make a cladogram, first you would choose a species with evolutionary relationships. So basically what that means is in a simple cladogram, such like as I've described so far, an individual species, they're basically just compared to each other. I mean, and so, however, in more complex ones, species may be grouped into a larger taxa, like a family, for example, and they would be compared in that way. And if that is done, then the results won't really be reliable if the groups aren't really clades. Alright? So then you have to choose the characters to compare, obviously. And so, as mentioned, a character is a general feature of an organism, and it may come in different versions and that's called character states. So like a front limb is a character in mammals, which, I mean, it could exist in different character states, such as a wing, an arm, a flipper, I mean, and the list goes on and on. So then you have to determine the polarity of the characters, which means you determine if the character came first, if it's a primitive character, or if it came later, which would then make it derived. And so this information may be available by examining the fossil record, and so then you would have to compare the in-groups, the out-groups, and so So after you determine the polarity, the you have to analyze the cladogram by so on the actual cladogram, you have to make sure that all species that are found today are on the tips of the tree. So they would be at the very, very top. Uh, each branch should have the derived characters that are found. So as you saw before, they would show like the mammary glands. Like, let's see if I can go back here. So you can see the mammary glands, the tetrapods, the hinged jaw. That's all on the branches right there. So you have to make sure that that's all where it's supposed to be. And you also have to know that all shared derived characters only appear once. So what that means is um, that you can't have lizards and rabbits being distant from each other because they both are tetrapods in this example here. So if the lizard was, let's say, behind the salmon, then you'd have being a tetrapod, and you'd have to have being a tetrapod a second time, and that just wouldn't make any sense. So this is very straightforward, but you have to choose the simplest cladogram possible. So it's expected for you to make more than one cladogram to be able to make sure that you're that it's like you have to get all of the possible ways that could happen. However, I mean, you just choose the simplest one because as you'll see later, there's a law that says that the most simple cladogram most likely is right. And finally, you have to provide the root to the phylogenetic tree by choosing a non-controversial outgroup. What I mean by that is, like, basically, it has to be known that that this phylogenetic tree, like the phylogenetic trees, have to be rooted, and it has a single node at the bottom of the tree, and this corresponds to a common ancestor for all of the species or groups of species in this tree. Um, a method for rooting would be to use this non-controversial outgroup, and and this would typically share morphological traits or DNA sequence similarities, and this would have to be with members of the in-group to allow for comparison, obviously, and between, and it also has to be for the out-group as well. And so basically, I mean, even though the in-group and out-group have distinct differences, they still have to be considered. So I know that these steps might be a little confusing, and I don't know if you want to use this or not, but I made a little mnemonic for this, and because I'm from Farmville, I decided that it would be some cows pass air as in gas so obnoxiously. I don't know why, this just popped into my head. So some would be for species, cows for characters, pass for polarity, air for analyze, so for simplicity, and obnoxiously for the outgroup, obviously. So if you try and remember this, then hopefully that will help you out. So the principle of parsimony, that's what I was trying to tell you about before, and basically what it states is the most simple cladogram is most likely the correct one. And by simplicity, it means the least amount of mutations and or branches.